Welcome to the debate. When you see a neighborhood demolished, you usually picture a wrecking ball, just this blunt, chaotic force of gravity and momentum just smashing things to dust.
Right, yeah. It looks like pure destruction. It's messy, it's loud, and it just feels like an unavoidable accident of, well, urban entropy.
Exactly. But what if you look closer and realize that wrecking ball is actually acting like a scalpel? What if the demolition isn't chaos at all, but a highly precise surgical procedure designed to extract wealth and eradicate a specific population?
That's a heavy thought. It really changes how you view every broken brick and every displaced family. It kind of forces you to ask if you're looking at a localized tragedy or, a grand blueprint.
And that is the exact tension we are exploring today through Mark Adam Cottenham's book, A Lie Cannot Live Forever. The text details one man's documented resistance against the institutional forces of San Francisco, and it ultimately culminates in his relocation to Thailand to live entirely unindexed, like off the grid and outside the system's reach.
Yeah, the core question we're unpacking from this material is whether the devastating events described, and we're talking everything from the displacement of 5,000 African American families in the Fillmore, all the way to the author's staggering 176 unconvicted arrests, are the result of a highly coordinated intentional machine,
Right.
or conversely, do they represent the compounding catastrophic effects of disparate, prejudiced bureaucracies operating with just profound administrative negligence? I'll be taking the stance that while the systemic racism is undeniable, framing it as a singular, globally coordinated simulation risks oversimplifying how separate bureaucracies independently exploit marginalized people.
And I'll be arguing that the evidence in the text points to a deliberate, architecturally designed machine that intentionally orchestrates these events. When I read this text, I don't see a series of unfortunate accidents. I see an architecture of suppression that uses urban redevelopment, legal harassment, and medical trauma to achieve, frankly, the total liquidation of specific populations.
Well, let's dig into that then, because the destruction detailed in the material is certainly immense.
It is. Let's start with the neighborhood level destruction because the author lays out the mechanics of this beautifully. We see Justin Herman's San Francisco Redevelopment Agency specifically weaponizing eminent domain for what was openly called Negro removal.
Right. The historical record on that is just blatant.
Exactly. The city didn't just bring in bulldozers. They used paperwork. They created what the author refers to as A2 documents. These were highly specific, legally sanctioned zoning orders that targeted and authorized the decimation of 2,500 Victorian homes owned by Black families.
The bureaucratic precision of that land grab it's chilling, honestly.
It is, but the true evidence of the machine is what happened next. You displace 5,000 families, but you have to put them somewhere.
Right, they don't just vanish.
Right. So the city orchestrated what the author calls a pincer move. They moved these displaced populations directly into Bayview Hunters Point, which was a toxic radioactive graveyard left over from naval shipyard testing.
Yeah, the environmental hazards there are well documented.
So they didn't just take their wealth, they contained them in an environmental hazard zone. When you combine that environmental containment with the physical toll of the justice system, it proves this is not mere negligence, it is deliberate design.
I absolutely acknowledge the devastation of the Fillmore displacement and, of course, the environmental disaster of Hunters Point. But let's look at the historical precedents the author uses to argue for a unified conspiracy. He points to the relationship between Jim Jones of the People's Temple and the San Francisco Redevelopment Agency.
Right, which is perhaps the most damning piece of evidence. The author details how Jones used spiritual manipulation to secure the deeds to Victorian homes from elderly African Americans in his congregation.
Which is just horrific on its own.
It is. And then he took those deeds behind closed doors and traded them to Justin Herman and the city in exchange for political power and protection. And when the pressure mounted, the machine had to eliminate the witnesses to this massive land grab, culminating in the Guyana massacre.
Wow.
That level of coordination between church, state, and ultimate liquidation, it demonstrates a unified architecture of suppression.
See, I come at it from a different way. The tragedy of the People's Temple is obviously one of the darkest chapters in American history. But I think we have to separate the tragedy from the intent.
How so?
Was this a pre-planned, state-sanctioned liquidation from the very start? Think of a vulture picking at a carcass. Was the city intentionally orchestrating the church's actions from day one? Or was the city simply acting opportunistically?
I mean, the results were the same.
True, but it is highly probable the redevelopment agency just callously capitalized on the manipulation of the People's Temple to achieve its existing gentrification goals. Opportunism is deadly, absolutely, but it doesn't require a master architect.
You argue the city was just being opportunistic, but that theory gets really complicated when you trace how this neighborhood-level opportunism filters down to a highly targeted individual attack.
Okay, let's look at the individual level.
The text shifts focus to the author's own life, specifically this staggering figure, 176 arrests without a single conviction.
Yeah, if you are listening to this and thinking, 176 arrests without a conviction is impossible, you aren't alone. It completely defies standard logic.
Exactly. And the author explains how they did it through what he calls administrative attrition. We are talking about the justice system operating out of 850 Bryant Street, where sheriffs were literally staging fights in a 7th-floor gladiator pit to manufacture assault charges against inmates.
Which is a whole other level of corruption.
It is, and the overlap is too precise to ignore. Like, while the author is recovering from a forced heart surgery at Santa Clara County Hospital, the family court, which is located in the exact same building at 850 Bryant, triggers a sudden custody battle to take his son.
The timing is incredible.
Right, that is a highly coordinated, multi-departmental attack. They are using the legal system to drain his capital and break his spirit simultaneously.
Well, the mechanics of how they drained his capital are fascinating. And they actually, I think, support my point about localized corruption rather than a grand conspiracy. The author breaks down the specific legal codes used against them, most notably California Penal Code Section 12022.1.
Right, the bail go-round.
Precisely. For anyone unfamiliar, this is how it works mechanically. If you are out on bail and a police officer arrests you again, even on a completely fabricated charge, Section 12022.1 allows the court to instantly enhance your penalties and skyrocket the new bail amount.
It's just a financial trap.
Exactly. The state repeatedly arrests him on baseless charges, forcing him to pay exorbitant, non-refundable bail premiums to bondsmen. Even when the charges are dropped, his capital is permanently depleted. It's a tax on existence. But why was this happening?
Because the machine wanted him gone.
Well, the text notes the FBI had actually cleared the author's independent lending system operating out of the Civic Center Hotel. His operations were legitimate.
So why the constant arrests then?
Because the local police and courts were eliminating a competitor. They used the frictional tool of slow law. Think of slow law like a denial of service attack on a computer network.
Okay, I like that analogy.
Right? The local precinct's goal wasn't necessarily to get a conviction. The goal was simply to flood the individual with so many legal processes, court dates, and bail fees that his financial system completely crashed. It is horrific bureaucratic predation. But precinct cops and local judges often share information informally to protect their turf. It doesn't mean there was a shadowy central committee pulling the strings globally.
I see why you think that. But let me give you a different perspective on how these systems overlap biologically. Because you can't separate the financial drain from the physical drain.
Fair enough.
The text connects the environmental poisoning of Hunter's Point, the prostate and liver cancer clusters caused by the radioactive shipyard, directly to the individual medical trauma the author suffered. The system doesn't just want your land or your money, it wants your body.
The transition from the justice system into the medical system is it's where the author's experience becomes truly harrowing.
It is. I mean, while incarcerated, he was forcibly administered Lexapro without a medical history check. This wasn't treatment, it was chemical subjugation.
Right.
That forced medication led to a severe allergic reaction, heart failure, and a stent procedure at the county hospital. The author frames the medical system as just another arm of the machine. They treat the human body as a zoned area for profit, generating revenue through insurance billing codes and pharmaceutical dependence, all while neutralizing a political threat.
That is a compelling argument, but Have you considered how much of this specific incident is a literal, calculated biological attack versus the tragic, documented reality of medical neglect in the carceral system?
I think the line is pretty blurry there.
It is, but forcing psych meds like Lexapro on inmates is horrifyingly a standardized method of chemical restraint used by underfunded, callous jail administrations. They drug inmates to keep them quiet. The resulting heart failure is a catastrophic consequence of that profound negligence.
But the result is the same neutralization.
Yes, but treating the body as a profit center is a very real critique of American healthcare. But applying it as an intentional, targeted hit on one man assumes a level of hypercompetence that these failing bureaucracies rarely possess.
If this is just a collection of incompetent, failing bureaucracies, then how do we explain the precision of the ultimate solution presented in the text?
You mean his escape?
Yes. The only way the author survives is through sovereign withdrawal. He has to completely exit the paradigm. He moves to Pattaya, Thailand, operating on the graveyard shift to avoid the system's time zone. And crucially, he utilizes Bitcoin to bypass what he calls slow money.
Ah, the banking equivalent to slow law.
Exactly. Traditional banks use 3-day holding periods, slow money, which gives local authorities the time they need to freeze your assets. By using the 5-minute truth, which is a rapid, decentralized financial transaction that settles instantly, he completely bypasses the traditional banking system's multi-day holds.
It's a fascinating tactical move.
It is. Furthermore, he reclaims the truth of block brilliance. He cites Lewis Latimer's carbon filament, Frederick Jones's mobile refrigeration, and Mark Dean's gigahertz chip. He argues the system actually uses stolen technology to build its surveillance grid. Stepping out of this global simulation into the 0 point, existing entirely off the grid and unindexed is presented as the only rational response.
Right. So I have to challenge you here. If the system isn't unified, why does achieving personal sovereignty require completely exiting the country, adopting decentralized global currency, and living in the shadows? Doesn't the necessity of a global escape prove the existence of a global trap?
It's a brilliant question, and it really gets to the central philosophical tension of the book. But, escaping a pervasive rot doesn't necessarily mean the rot has a central brain.
I'm listening. The author's use of the 5-minute truth to bypass banks and his relocation to Thailand is a masterful tactical escape. He removed himself from the jurisdiction of systems that were built to marginalize him. But the forces he escaped, the local police harassment, the predatory bail enhancements, the bureaucratic medical neglect, are devastatingly real, localized forms of institutional racism.
But they are everywhere.
Exactly. You have to leave the country because those localized systems are ubiquitous in America, not because a global Masonic simulation is tracking your every move.
I'm just not convinced by that line of reasoning, because the overlapping timelines are simply too precise. When you look at the property theft via eminent domain A2 documents, the relentless legal harassment of 176 arrests, and the physical degradation through environmental toxins and forced chemical restraint, you see a clear pattern.
You see a pattern? But is it a conspiracy?
I argue it presents an undeniable architecture of suppression. This isn't a series of unfortunate bureaucratic accidents. This is a machine operating exactly as it was intended to operate, raking down an individual from every conceivable angle.
And I would conclude that the material documents a profound, hard-fought victory of personal sovereignty. The author's withdrawal to Thailand and his mastery of decentralized finance is a masterclass in resilience against systemic odds. But we can honor that immense resilience while recognizing that the enemy he defeated was the compounding weight of systemic negligence, local corruption, and historical prejudice, rather than a singular global architect.
Well, regardless of how you define the system it overcame, it is a remarkable testament to human endurance. The mechanics of slow law and administrative attrition we've discussed today are complex, and examining them through these multiple lenses helps us understand how power actually operates on a mechanical level and how it can ultimately be bypassed.
Absolutely. For anyone listening, the history of the San Francisco Redevelopment Agency and the tactical concept of reaching the 0 point detailed in this material are absolutely worth exploring further. There is so much more in the text that we could cover today.
As we sign off, I keep thinking back to that wrecking ball, whether it is swinging wildly through a neighborhood on the chain of bureaucratic negligence or being guided precisely like a scalpel by an invisible hand if you are the one living in the house. Does the intention matter more than the impact?